Let me read to you something regarding the fetus from some of the statements of Shaykh Abdul Aziz bin Baz rahimahullah, the Imam and the Mujaddid, Shaykh al-Islam, and likewise Shaykh al-Allama al-Faqih, Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen. And this is for the benefit of our sisters. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect them and preserve their children who suffer miscarriages. So a question was put to Shaykh Abdul Aziz bin Baz regarding the miscarriage. So he said, if the fetus miscarries before 4 months, i.e. before 120 days, then it is not given a name, and nor is an aqiqah, meaning the slaughter of animals, carried out for it. For the aqiqah and the naming is for the fetus that is carried in the 5th month or thereafter, meaning after 120 days. And this is after the soul is blown into it, because at that stage, meaning after the soul is blown into it at 120 days, then it is considered as a person, which carries the rulings of a person. So in this case, if the miscarriage takes place after 120 days, then an animal is sacrificed as an aqiqah, and the 2 for a male, 1 for a female. As for the fetus that is miscarried in the 4th month, which is before 120 days, or in the 3rd month, which is even earlier than that, then it does not carry the ruling of a person. However, if the miscarried fetus had a defined body that is clear, i.e., it has the attributes of a person. So this is the miscarried fetus before 120 days. Is it alive or not alive? It is not alive. The soul has not been blown into it. So now we're talking about a fetus before 120 days. So if it has the attributes of a person, even though the soul has not been blown into it, it has a head, hands, legs, and so on, then the mother's bleeding is considered as postnatal nifas. So she does not pray or fast up until the bleeding ceases or the 40 days expire after miscarriage, whichever of the 2 comes first. So even though the soul has not been blown into it, because the features of the fetus are visible and distinct, the hands, the head, the feet, and so on, because they are distinct, even though it is not a person, even though there is no janazah, even though there is no aqiqah, even though there is no naming, the woman still goes through the rulings of nifas, of postnatal bleeding, which has an upper limit of 40 days. Even though the dead or the fetus that is removed or that is expelled from the body is not considered to be a person. As for the fetus itself that miscarries before 120 days, then it does not take the ruling of being a deceased person or the ruling of being a baby. It is buried in the soil in any location, and that is sufficient. There is no washing, no shrouding, and no janazah, no funeral prayer for it, because it is not considered a person, and therefore does not carry the same rulings as the deceased up until the soul has been blown into it, which is at 120 days. So any fetus that miscarries after 120 days, then all of these affairs are carried out. So if it is miscarried in the 4th month prior to 120 days, or in the 3rd month, then it is considered to be flesh, mudgha. And maybe the limbs are distinct, such as the head and the legs and so on. In this case, the mother does not pray and she does not fast during her postnatal bleeding for 40 days or less, if her bleeding stops before 40 days. So when she becomes pure at 40 days, or she becomes pure even before 40 days, then she resumes her prayer and fasting. And if she completes the 40 days because her bleeding carries on for 40 days, then she stops at 40 days, even if she is bleeding, and she bathes, makes the ghusl, as she would do when she finishes her monthly cycle, and she prays and fasts. But if her bleeding continues even beyond 40 days, then she still prays and fasts, makes the ghusl, prays and fasts, but she must perform wudu before each of the prayers, just like a woman who has continual non-menstrual bleeding, known as istihada, and therefore she is considered to be mustahada. However, if she is pure at 40 days, then she can pray, fast, and have relations with her husband. On the other hand, if she miscarried the fetus, and the fetus is not discernible, meaning it is a morsel of flesh, or it is a congealed clot of blood, meaning it is a mudgha or an alaqa, but there's no distinct features, so it is one of the two, then the mother's subsequent bleeding, even if she bleeds, is not nifas. It is not postnatal bleeding, because there is no distinct body form of the fetus. So she does not stop praying, she does not stop fasting, and she does not withhold from relations with her husband. So that is when there are no distinct human limbs, no hands, no legs, no head, and so on. So in this situation, her bleeding is not considered to be preventative. It does not prevent her from fasting. It does not prevent her from praying, and so on. So the issue is here that when the fetus is miscarried before 120 days, and there are no distinct bodily limbs, then that bleeding that takes place is not considered to be nifas. It is only considered to be nifas before 120 days if the limbs are distinct. So it is upon her to pray, fast, and have relations with her husband, and she makes wudu for every prayer if she is bleeding, just as a woman who is continuously non-menstrually bleeding. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen, rahimahullah ta'ala, he said, if the fetus is miscarried before the completion of 120 days, there is no janazah prayer to be prayed for it. Rather, it is taken and buried in the earth in any place without a funeral. However, if the 120 days are completed, i.e. 4 months are completed, then it is to be considered a person. So if the fetus is miscarried beyond that point, after 120 days, then it is washed and shrouded, and it is given a janazah and buried in the graveyard of the Muslims. Even if it is only the size of the palm of your hand, it is still prayed over and buried in the graveyard of the Muslims, if it was counted amongst the Muslims, meaning that its parents were Muslims. However, if the child was the child of Christians or non-Muslims, meaning the parents were Christians, then the child is not buried in the graveyard of the Muslims. It is merely buried without the ghusl, and without the shrouding, and without a janazah. And that is the case even for a baby, due to the fact that when the Prophet ﷺ was asked about the children of the mushrikeen, he said they are from them, meaning in the dunya you treat them as if they are from them. So you would bury them as you would bury the mushrikeen, meaning you would just place them in the soil, and it is upon them to do whatever they wish. But if that child came into the hands of the Muslim and it was beyond 120 days and the parents turned out to be Christians, then we just bury that child without any janazah and without any shrouding. Why? Because in the ruling of the dunya, they are considered to be from them, as the Prophet ﷺ said, they are from them. As for Yawm al-Qiyamah, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will question them, and Allah will put them to a test. And we have mentioned that test on several occasions before. The point is, as Ibn Uthaymeen said, that if the 4 months are completed, 120 days, and then the fetus is miscarried, it is washed, meaning after 120 days, then it is washed, shrouded, and the janazah prayer is prayed for it, and it is buried in a Muslim graveyard. And also it is named, it is given a name, and an aqiqah is performed. And this is the correct opinion of this, and this is in the most correct opinion of the scholars, so that the fetus, so that that baby, after 120 days, because it is a living being, will intercede for his parents on the day of resurrection. And Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Ibn Uthaymeen said, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud narrates from the Prophet ﷺ the three stages of darkness. When he said that Allah's Messenger ﷺ said, verily the creation of each one of you is brought together in his mother's womb for 40 days in the form of a nutfa. Then an alaqa for a likewise for 40 days likewise, and then a mudgha for a like period. So Ibn Uthaymeen said, so when a man and woman have relations, he plants in her womb a watery liquid that remains there for 40 days as a nutfa. In that state, it is a watery liquid. However, it changes slowly but surely, becoming gradually darker or becoming gradually redder in color until the 40 days are complete. So when it reaches 40 days, its redness becomes complete and it becomes a red clot of blood, an alaqa. And it remains as such for a further 40 days, meaning as a clot of blood that is congealed, that is a congealed substance. And then it thickens gradually over time, slowly but surely, up until 80 days are completed. When 80 days have been completed, it is then a mudgha, which is a morsel of flesh. And Allah the Most High has said, a lump of flesh, some formed and some unformed. In Surah Al-Hajj, ayah number 5. So it remains as such for 40 days further. So the fetus with limbs is formed from day 81 through to day 120. And its distinct form is not apparent and clear up until 90 days in most cases. And that is the end of the words of Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen.